Hello, good morning. This is Emiliana Simon Thomas, and I'm here with my all-time favorite collaborator and mentor, Dacher Keltner. And we're here to welcome you to the third and perhaps final for this launch of the Science of Happiness live chat, where we will talk about some of the ideas that students have brought up and asked questions about on the discussion boards on edX. And also, if you're joining us live in real time, please post your questions and we'll get to those also. We'd love to have it be a real-time, dynamic, interactive conversation. So, Dacher, thank you so much for joining us this time around. Why don't we start with you sort of telling us a little bit about yourself? Students all know you from your videos, but it's nice to get a little bit more of a personal feel. So tell us a little bit about where you're coming from and what brought you to the Science of Happiness.
Well, I got to the topic of happiness like a lot of people because of my family, and I have a mom who's a literature professor, and then a dad who's an artist, and they were kind of experimental type people. And so just as my brother and I grew up, they engaged us in really the questions of meaning, right? Which is, what is beauty? What is kindness? How do you make a difference in the world? And what was interesting, Em, is, in a way like you and your background, I grew up in a kind of an environment that was really fertile with respect to, just trying to find deep purpose in the world. But I just love science, and from an early age, I liked math, I liked statistics, I liked the scientific method. And so, when I started to dive into the neuroscience and physiology of emotion and realized that there was this whole area of inquiry, that relates to stuff that you and I did scientifically together, like compassion and gratitude and now beauty and awe, it really was kind of the calling that I've long had. So that's how I got here.
Well, fabulous. All right, well, let's dive right into some of the questions that were posted. And the first one is such an interesting one, Dacher, because it's one that has come up for all three of the chats. So if you, as you know, we had a chat where we were joined by Sonia Lubomirsky, and we had a second chat with Matt Killingsworth, and we were discussing ideas from the earlier parts of the course. But again and again, this idea that somehow we're catering in a particular way to extroverts, and that somehow the science of happiness lends itself to extroverts more so than it does to introverts is this recurring theme. So I wonder if you want to speculate or talk a little bit about whether you think that there's some actual legitimacy to that idea or that feeling, or if you think that there's reasons to think that our science and the practices and the ideas that we offer in this course actually might be as interesting or useful for people who consider themselves introverts as they are for extroverts.
Yeah, I get that question a lot, and I think that with the change in society, so for example, with the rise of the new social media, and you and I go down to Facebook once a week to help with their work, and there are a lot of very introverted people who are doing well. So it's really a shift. And in a way, it's a golden era, if you will, of introverts. So is our science and the course kind of, does it privilege extroversion or introversion? And I think one of the things that, one of the ways that I think about that, Em, is that I think one of the strengths of this class and what we took great pains to do is to talk about 8 or 10 different kinds of strategies that really benefit your health and your happiness. And I think what the science tells us is that some of them work better depending on your temperament, right? So, you and I have long talked about like the mindfulness exercises, the strength and happiness that you find in modesty and in a sense of sort of reserve, the ability to not kind of offend people and to reconcile are all strengths that are really places where introverts do a lot better, and you find in the empirical literature that as you move through age, introversion tends to be associated with more happiness because of some of those strategies. So I think the real challenge of the class when we ask questions about individual differences in temperament you got to find your own set of tools or practices, right? And then the other thing that often comes up with the introversion question is, we really emphasize social relationships and social connectivity as the one foundation of happiness. And there what we mean, and in the clinical literature, people really know this, is it really is just about friendship and not the number of friends, right? It really is about feeling supported and connected to some people and not necessarily large throngs. So I think that too is an important piece of wisdom for the introverts out there.
Yeah, good. Well, that was super helpful and brought some good clarity. It also you also actually led us really nicely into the next big question, and there was a little bit of a conversation about this amongst students, and the question is really what happens to happiness levels over the lifespan? Is there some systematic effect of aging on happiness, and in particular, once people get in their early 60s and beyond, and the conversation was sort of like, well, my elderly parent is really joyous and enjoying life in this kind of newfound less restricted way, and the other half was, my older relative is extraordinarily and depressingly grumpy, and I'm not quite sure how to connect with them, and particularly how to sort of offer some of the insights that I've gained from this course to them at this point in their life. So do you have any thoughts or sort of basic research ideas or scientific principles about the relationship between aging and happiness?
You know, when over the past 15 years that I've taught happiness and watched the science grow here at Berkeley, there are in a way two developmental findings that blow me away. And one is probably something that a lot of our audience members are grappling with, and you and I grapple with, which is, as parents, which is there's this massive decline in happiness in the adolescent years, and it is one of the dramatic effects. And I hope our science will be useful, and for those of you who are applying it to school settings and teenagers, more power to you. The second really important developmental finding that really surprised people, and it actually is in the Kahneman, the Deaton and Kahneman paper that we talked about earlier, which is that pretty regularly in different parts of the world, you find, the middle of life has a lot of complexity to it, and your marriage is struggling more and so forth, and you're dealing with kids and bills. And then there's kind of this sweet spot in life of, really across social classes too, from 60 to 75, where people tend to rise in happiness. And there are a lot of different notions about this. One is their nervous systems calm down, right? So they're not flaring up at all the stresses of life, and that's been documented. And then I think the other thing is that there's this sharpening of wisdom, right? Where, and this is Bob Levinson at Berkeley and Laura Karstensen at Stanford and others showing, as you age, you start to realize that experiences matter more than consumer products, that a time with friends is more important than trying to, sort of burnish your reputation. A lot of the essential wisdom of the class, people who are older tend to be better practitioners of it. So I actually think we should be taking the wisdom of the people who are aging and apply it to younger people. So I think there's a real optimistic note. In terms of dealing with the grouchy, aging parent or relative or neighbor or friend, again, I think that the tools of the class are useful, and I think that it's really, like James Baraz, who's been a longtime practitioner or partner with us with his Awakening Joy class, had a mom who had some grouchiness, and she started to really just do what we're doing, which is, take a moment to feel grateful, and he feels like a lot of older people that was really useful.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, Dacher, I'm wondering if there's if there's some predictable pattern of psychological shift that actually aging people who end up in that grumpy sphere are struggling with? And is it that they're perhaps more finding themselves more lonely because they don't have as many friends, they don't have as much of a community? Or is it also perhaps something about habituation, right?
Yeah.
About the fact that, well, I've had all the pleasures in life, and these things that used to be super exciting, in lines with the nervous system calming down, maybe they're just kind of they're less stimulating now, and so what's all this worth if I can't have that kind of rush of pleasure anymore? And what that made me think is, well, what kinds of practices might someone actually uh, tailor for the grumpy older relative or friend? And maybe it's really the ones that you kind of spontaneously mentioned, the gratitude, the savoring sort
Yeah.
of domains. Like, is there a
Yeah.
way to kind of rediscover these pleasurable experiences that you can have in day-to-day life that perhaps you're kind of taking for granted? And then second, the loneliness issue. And I can't really put the onus of that upon the individuals who are in that place, but rather on the people around them. What can we do as younger people to support our elderly relatives and friends who maybe are finding themselves with less of a sense of community and connection? So those are
Yeah.
just some of my thoughts on
Well
that.
put.
So um, so the next question is a little bit of a shift into a different direction, but a lot of people were interested in what else we're going to do. So we've got a lot of really interesting data from people who took this course. We have it in the form of the surveys that we asked people to take, and I'd like to just right now thank everyone and anyone who took the 8 to 15 minutes and thoughtfully actually responded to our pre and post course surveys. Those are going to be extraordinarily useful for us. If you haven't done the post course survey, please, once we're done with this, go find the link and complete it for us. It will do nothing but help us understand what worked and how we can actually improve our course in future launches. So anyway, that said, what else are we going to do, right? We have the surveys, we have these kind of performance-related questions, the problem sets, the midterm, the final, the happiness activities, plus asking people how did they like them, and how many did they do, and how big of an impact did they have. So we were very intentional about trying to understand something about how this course works, and people want to know, well, what are we going to do with this, and will they get to learn about it? In brief, I'll say yes, we're going to do as much as we can with it. We've got this wonderful body of data. We're super interested in finding out how the course and the materials and the practices influence people. We're really interested in your perspective out there, people who are in the course, who watched it, what worked. I know that there was some experience because I see people who go, hey, I'm in your course, it's so great. I'm only on week 4. So I understand that sometimes we don't plan for as much time as things require, and we want to know what can we do to make this better for people who are trying to fit it into their busy lives. We will most definitely and really humbly appreciate the opportunity in the foreseeable future to communicate with students who are in the science of happiness. And we'll communicate with you by saying, hey, here's a new story we got out of this data, and here are some interesting new insights that we think might be valuable to you. As you know, the science runs on. Like what we've talked about is already dated, right? We know that there are new studies and new findings and new insights that we wish were in the course as it's been produced, and we'll add things in as we can. So we'd also like to offer those insights to you. So what else do you think, Dacher, we might share or think about in regards to the data from the course?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's never been a study like this where you have, in a way, the class, as great classes are, or great forms of education,
Mhm.
are forms of inquiry and intervention, right? Where you're really kind of taking in material and learning a lot and putting it into practice and trying to make it part of your social life. And so we'll be able to, really for the first time in the science of happiness literature, ask what over time do those kinds of learning experiences and practices do for a person's sense of gratitude or a sense of their well-being or stress. And I mean, that's important science in its own right. And then it really becomes an important part of the mission of the class, which is to, you know, really to found it upon both scientific literature and testing to get this material out to different kinds of audiences. So, but I think that'll be really interesting to see how people's, stress and happiness profiles change over time, and
Mhm.
as a result of the class.
Yeah, yeah, good. One of the sort of related questions which someone posted was, what's the deal with the emoticons, right? What are we after there? What do they actually mean? There was, I don't know if you know this, Dacher, but there was an opportunity to check in, as we called it, by just seeing the images themselves, and then there was another opportunity where you could actually see labels. So some people actually knew what the emoticons were meant to be expressing, and most didn't. That was really meant to be for people who are who have certain sensory impairments, but some people discovered it anyway and found it quite useful. So maybe you want to give a quick little
Yeah.
story about where those came from and what we're after, and why we included and built them into this course.
Oh man. So, for those of you who are willing to indulge Em and I in this story, so Em and I have been working down at Facebook and helping them make the site more compassionate. And they asked us to redesign emoticons, and so Matt Jones, who's a great illustrator, drew those emoticons, and then they led us in our independent work down at Facebook to help redesign some stickers that now hundreds of millions of people have used in communicating uh, kind of emotionally rich feelings on the Facebook site. But really, the relevance of those emoticons is turning out to be massive. So, here's a little bit of science for those of you who are interested in those emoticons. We actually have a whole library of them that really represent 40 to 50 emotional states that Charles Darwin wrote about in The Expression of Emotion in Man and Animals in 1872. First time ever that those states have been portrayed. States like reverence, contemplation, determination, obstinacy, really interesting psychological states. Our lab, and Emiliana has been part of this, have now tested those emoticons in different parts of the world, like in China, and they tend to have the same meaning. As that science has gotten going, here's where it gets really interesting, which is that if I try to understand, let's say we did this class in China, and we wanted to know if people felt awesome about the class. Well, the word awesome in China means something really different. It means fearful disrespect, fearful respect in China. It has a different connotation in the West. So the emoticons become this really interesting universal language of feeling, right? So we're really pushing the use of those, and this class was one of the first. It was really the first to really kind of test that out.
Yeah, yeah. So what we wanted to do was get a kind of longitudinal assessment of how people were doing that, like Dacher explained, wasn't necessarily tied to people's verbal understanding of a word, but it was just driven by this kind of gestalt. Like, I see this image, it conveys a certain emotional feeling to me, and I can relate to it and characterize my own sort of recent few days according to this particular signal. Just to walk you through the 6 states that we really sort of landed upon to make it brief but also comprehensive. We didn't want to have people rate themselves on all 40 different faces, so we chose 6. And there were 3 that were meant to be in the sort of more positive emotional sphere and 3 in the more negative emotional sphere. The positives were meant to be just a really generic happy, I feel good or content. An expression of amusement, like I'm joyous, I'm laughing, and an expression that is sort of this loving affection kind of smile, like I feel connected and affiliative. For the negative ones, we had an anger face, which probably was not hard to understand. I think it was red and had smoke coming out of the ears. We had an anxious face, right? The sort of gritting teeth, I'm feeling stressed, and then we had a disgusted face. So we're really sort of trying to get at how strongly do those experiences represent the I don't know, the quality of your recent past few days. And there's some data to suggest that the extent to which one is stronger than the other is probably associated with your general happiness. Now, one other point which students did ask about was, what about day-to-day experiences? I mean, during this course, my cat died, and it was incredibly sad for me.
Yeah.
And I know that that had an impact on my, happiness over time. And what I'd like to say is, yes, of course that happens, and that's very important. And these measures aren't going to tell us with perfect precision how happy you are on a given day, but rather just give us sort of a rough estimate of how you're doing over time. And we emphasized in the beginning of a course how important it is to respect and own and accept certain kinds of negative states like sadness. It's very important to express those. It's also very important to be able to recover from them and to know that you have people who will help support you in sort of transcending those more difficult states. So yeah, that's our story about the emoticons and the measurement question. And now, Dacher, I'm going to move to some more specific questions about sort of techniques or ideas that we discussed in the course and our videos. And the first one is about the possible selves narrative. So we went into this storyline of the importance of your personal narrative and how there's a relationship between the complexity or flexibility of your narrative. If you're somebody who has multiple possible selves, that's actually sort of easier or more, it lends itself more readily to being happy and recovering than being fixed to a specific idea of who you are. This is really kind of a new idea for some people. What can you tell us about it, and what can a person do to perhaps sort of broaden their scope of possible selves?
So, this the idea of the possible self, I think it's one of these subtexts, if you will, or motifs to the class, right? Which is, as people started to study what our selves are like and how we represent what our identities are, people like Hazel Marcus got really interested in the fact that most people tend to be many things, right? And that really is fitting with kind of the Walt Whitman perspective of, God, I have all these different facets and all these different interests. And I develop many possible selves that can be kind of put into play in any situation. So, I'm a teacher and a scientist and a person who likes certain music, and I have certain imaginative kinds of selves, certain aspirations and the like. And then what people started to find is that if you don't put all your eggs in one basket and you have these many selves that are really important to you, you handle stress better, right? So if I have a paper rejected or a grant rejected, but I know I have this engagement in my family or what have you, I handle that stress better. So that's really good news. I actually think there's a richer dimension to this, which is the possible selves are about the imagination. They're about who you can imagine you can be. And they're also about, at their core, they're about growth and change, right? That we do change and evolve and become really interesting new people. If you want to push it, almost on a minute-by-minute basis, right? There's just all this flux and change in our identities. The East, in East Asian cultures, they get this right away. Like, there's no fixed self. It's changing. It's transient. And so in a way, I hope our class, with all these practices and the changes that they bring about and kind of the orientation to other people, that it cultivates this sense of, yeah, I may be going through a really crummy time right now, but life is about change, and the self is about change. So that's where it came from. And I think the challenge for the people in the class is to take these techniques and imagine new pieces to their identity.
Yeah, no, I love that. Thank you so much. Two other sort of more theoretical questions. One, so many of our practices involved writing.
Yeah.
And the student wants to know, why writing, number one? Is there some evidence that writing is somehow privileged in terms of having a stronger impact on people or imparting change on people's lives, perhaps in in the very nature of what you just discussed in terms of broadening the imagination and allowing people to think about themselves in new and different ways. And then secondly, couldn't we get it through typing or some other sort of more modern, high-tech way of expression? What do you think about that? Why writing? And
Yeah.
is it as important as it seems to be based on how our practices looked?
Well, writing became important because of Jamie Pennebaker at Texas and
Yeah.
his, expressive writing paradigm, where you just write about tough stuff in life and you benefit from it, which we talked about. Um, but I actually think it not only pertains to typing, but it pertains to, and you would have anticipated this with your neuroscience background, which is, um, when you engage in symbolic representations of experience, and the most obvious thing to do is to write things down with symbols, but you could type it, you could use the spoken word, you could draw it, you could, as people do in art therapy, you could perform it in drama. That you could sing it. There are new studies coming out showing that when people listen to particular profiles of music, they have the same benefits as if you were to write about a trying time. I think any kind of symbolic, dramatic representation tends to benefit for similar reasons. And it's back to that thing you were interested in grad school and postdoc, like how the frontal lobes get activated to calm the amygdala and the stress circuitry down. So I really hope all of our audience members, I mean, one of the lessons they take from this is really turn to the symbolic realms of life, be it a movie or reading poetry or dance, or that helps us give these alternative perspectives to life.
Yeah, yeah, good, good. Um, One last topical question, which came to me both in person. I actually have a neighbor who is a healthcare worker and said that one of her clients was taking the course and said to her, "Hey, I had a real problem with this particular issue." And this question also came up in the discussion boards for this particular live chat. And the question is about the idea of maximizing versus satisficing.
Yeah.
The person who brought this up to my neighbor had taken some sort of Gallup strengths poll online and had been told that their particular biggest strength as a leader was that they were a maximizer. And then they were taking our course, and here we said, well, actually being a maximizer is not so good for you, and it's not as good for happiness as being a satisficer, and blah, blah, blah. And the person said, what gives? How do I reconcile these? And then the second person actually asks online, as they were finishing the course and getting their 60%, requirement in order to get a certificate, they realized they were actually trying harder than that. They were trying to get, an 80 or a 90 or whatever the best they could, and that was important to them. And then they thought in that moment, well, why don't I just be satisfied with the 60 that is all that's required of me? And then they thought, well, what's happening here? Is this urge to maximize my score something that's actually not a service to me? Are there
Yeah.
points in life where being a maximizer is actually a strength or a service to happiness, or is it always something to avoid? I guess that's the nature of the question.
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And I resonate with the critique. And I think that when you think about the phenomena that we've talked about in this class, you always have to sort of take a levels of analysis approach, right? And so what maximizing the perils of maximizing, I think, really have to do with kind of momentary experience. And if you try to maximize the pleasure of a conversation or seeing a movie or eating a burrito or what have you, you're going to run into trouble, right? Because that interferes with that momentary experience.
Mm-hmm.
By contrast, the first counterexample of, wow, I'm a leader, I try to maximize how everybody's doing in my organization. that probably is a good strategy, but that's a really different phenomenon, which is you're maximizing the greater good, right? You are maximizing how well a lot of people are doing, and it's hard to think of a situation in which that wouldn't serve you well. It's good to maximize
Mhm.
the benefits of many. And then I think that, to the person who's thinking about, I was really trying to get the most out of this class, again, that's a different level of analysis, which is thinking about an 8 or 10 week period and stepping back and thinking about what am I doing during that 10-week period of life. There, you're probably well served by a maximizing. We don't know empirically,
Mhm.
but I think the student is right that just think about all the ways in which they can get the most out of the experience is probably beneficial. So
Mhm.
levels of analysis, thinking about momentary experiences versus broader periods of time is useful.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. It seems like for the like you said, the momentary experiences and perhaps the sort of past reflection, maximizing isn't a great service. But the thinking about the future or thinking broadly about
Right.
many people,
Yeah.
maximizing might be something that does serve happiness. And like you said, it's an empirical question, and we're working on it. And this is just the beginning, and we're so lucky to be in this sort of cutting edge space where ideas get thrown out and talked
Yep.
about, but then we realize, oh wait, there's another question that is really important that deserves study. And so, yes, those of you out there who are interested in this, do more studies, and we will too.
Absolutely.
Maximizing and satisficing, and when those different qualities of your sort of motivation or broad view of the world relate and how they relate to happiness. Um, okay, so I want to shift now to a topic that came up in a couple different ways, and that's a little bit of a tough one. And I sympathize with it deeply. It's a little bit like the example I brought up earlier about sad things happen over the course of 8 weeks, and how do I reconcile that with this sort of idea that perhaps through participating and engaging with the practices in this course, I might be becoming a happier person. But now, how do we really deliver the ideas and the practices that are in this course to people who are suffering from more chronic ways? So we have a couple of people who said, I have a number of chronic illnesses, and my life is really difficult. And I actually lack community as a result of my chronic illnesses. I feel sort of abandoned in some ways by people who feel afraid of or can't relate to me anymore. And I'm just, I don't have a great outlook on my future with the illness that I'm suffering from. And how can we be happier or use this material or embody it when things feel so dismal, I guess.
Well, I think that the when you put the sun, it's a question that I've thought hard about. You know, I mean, and you know this, Em, like we parts of my family, including myself, have struggled with clinical levels of anxiety, which really, we're starting to learn disrupts how you adapt to life. It can be physically exhausting when you have chronic panic attacks. We know that there are health costs associated with chronic levels of high cortisol anxiety, like I've had and my daughter's had, and my mom and the like. And the what I've learned from personal experience, uh, and we are learning from kind of new cutting edge developments in clinical health science, is that the tools that we've taught are not just about lifting up from a 5 on a happiness scale to an 8, but
Mhm.
also from moving from a -3 to a -1. If you're feeling a lot of physical pain,
Mhm.
and this is really one of the most important things John Kabat-Zinn, this is the foundation of that mindfulness, the MBSR program is, wow, if I am suffering from chronic pain, really the right kind of mindfulness practice, the right kind of gratitude practice getting out and looking at beautiful things, just given the rudimentary effects it has on the nervous system, you
Mhm.
know, calming amygdala reactivity, calming cortisol reactivity, activating reward circuitry and the like, will help you with the chronic problems of life. And I know, in looking at the tougher stuff of life as well, people dealing with uh, anxiety and depression, and now there's a mindfulness tradition in England that
Mhm.
they're finding, with some quirks, that it's powerful stuff there too. So they're pretty applicable principles that we have to apply.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in a kind of related question, someone asked, how do we how do we deliver this stuff to people who have nothing? So
Yeah,
imagine you're put in a position to um, be the lecturer for the science of happiness in a slum neighborhood in India or South Africa, and you have people who really their basic needs aren't being met. How do we, does this stuff work, or is it really kind of catered to our sort of privileged, sort of upper middle class, people who have more flexibility, who can pursue their self-development and transformation? Is there a way that this works across socioeconomic lines, or is that something that we still have to think about and perhaps adapt?
well, it's interesting. I mean, and you know this, Em, but I don't think our class may know this. But I've done a lot of research on poverty and social class,
Hmm.
which is really not part of this class, and we're finding really counterintuitively that there is tremendous compassion and altruism and sharing and empathy in the lower socioeconomic strata. In fact, often higher than the upper classes.
Yeah.
And this is replicated in many different parts of the world. So that tells us, in some sense, we lose things as we move up in the economic strata
Hmm.
that we need to return to themes in this class. What I will say, which I'm really excited about, and what the Greater Good Science Center I think represents, is that a lot of there are enormous costs to being raised in poverty. It costs you in terms of your nervous system. It costs you, in terms of the stresses upon parenting. It costs you in terms of the beauty you see on a daily basis that calms you down. And I think that the class, for those that have an opportunity to um, make a difference in this realm, the class points to a lot of really cheap ways of improving the world
Yeah.
without changing the tax code, which I am not optimistic about. Things like, when we talked about awe and beauty, there are a lot of data that show that having nice parks around will make you a better student, right? And that is deprived of kids in lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I would use the science proactively in that way. To take it wherever it's needed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think it's important, as you've begun to point out from the work that you're doing, looking at socioeconomic status and pro-social behavior and things like that, just purely anecdotally. Some of you know, I recently had an opportunity to do some teaching in India, and I took my children, and one of our experiences was actually to hear about a person who is starting a sort of hostel for kids who he draws from slum neighborhoods, and he gives them the things that they need: a warm place to sleep and clothing and access to education. He's really trying to transform their lives so that they don't end up in a cycle of poverty. And my daughters actually went to tour in this neighborhood. And I think at some level we were all sort of nervous. Is this going to be really distressing? And the reality is that they were awestruck at how much joy
Yeah,
they
yeah,
perceived in these people who, again, their basic needs weren't being met. They don't have electricity and plumbing. They don't have,
yeah,
different clothes to wear on a day-to-day basis. They only have each other and their creative imaginations. And that's not to say that there shouldn't be changes
right.
such that people have more opportunities. Obviously, that's the goal. But the assumption that people who are impoverished or in low socioeconomic brackets somehow don't have the capacity for joy, I think, is a wrong one.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the extent that we can. sort of lend ourselves or contribute to the opportunity for more joy and connection with people who live different lives than we do, the better. So again, it's purely anecdotal, but
Yeah,
a fun story to think about.
very powerful.
So now there's this question about what's next. Okay, so we got probably 3 or 4 conversation starters, which were, are you going to do a follow-up course? When's the Science of Happiness 2 starting? Or someone actually named it at XGG 102. So what's next? And are we going to do another course? And also, someone wrote in, my fiance and daughter really want to take this course. What can I tell them? And is there an opportunity to take this course now that we've this particular run of it has come near to its end? Will it be offered again?
Well, I think, Em, you know the answer, right? I mean, I'm hoping you know the answer because it's on edX, isn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, the answer is number one. We're actually relaunching the course right away as what's called a self-paced course. So in the course that students have registered for and participated in now, we had a more structured temporal sequence. So we had it done week by week. We were reminding people to log on and check out the content and materials for each week. And the intent was for it to last that specific kind of semester-ish duration of time. We know, and edX knows, that there's more work to be done around how to deliver online courses in a way that gets beyond the registration bump. So for many courses, ours included, you get this really huge number of people who register, and then there's this kind of precipitous drop-off as time goes by. And part of the question there is, how do we make the courses more sort of perpetually compelling, right? How do we get it so that people do stay on and continue to feel motivated? And part of that is our question, but part of it is an edX and a broader sort of online education question, and perhaps even a broader societal question. Like, maybe in order for online courses to work, they have to be an endorsed part of your workday in order for you to feel like you have time to do it. I think most people who didn't end up finishing everything in the course just ran out of time. They simply couldn't fit it into the puzzle of day-to-day life, and how can we sort of shift things? Anyway, all that said, the self-paced course is supposed to be a little bit more flexible in that you can register. I think you can actually register now, today. The content will be up all at once. So you could do it in a week if you had that flexibility and openness, or you can do it over the course of a longer period of months, because the end date is in May. So you have from December to May to really complete everything in this self-paced version of the course. It should be very similar, with the exception of maybe a little bit more sort of temporal asynchrony around discussion. So you might not expect that a huge number of people are all going to be at the same place at the same time. But if you sign up with friends, or you make your own community around registering for the course, you can really remedy that problem. And we're seeing that is a strength, right? If people do know other people in the course and they're talking about it and they're joining forces, it's a more motivating endeavor than just signing up on your own and expecting to fit it in with nobody else really contributing to that. So yes, you can do it right away. Your fiance and daughter can do it right away. Beyond that, Dacher and I will be furiously working over the next 4 or 5 months to update the existing course for a second big launch in September of 2015, which again will be the sort of semester guided version of the course. And we'll be working in new ideas that are from more current research, and fixing anything we find that might not have worked as well as we hoped it would. We'll be working in feedback from all of the surveys that you've so generously provided your input on. So that's the long answer. Dacher, anything you want to add to the future of the science of happiness?
Oh my God. So, I mean, I hope, Em, you really got it right, and I hope our listeners appreciate this, which is that one of the wonderful things about science is it's always evolving, right? And by the time Em and I launch the next class, we'll have a lot of new discoveries to represent, and we'll sharpen our message and no doubt have new themes. As one example, at the end of the class, we signaled some new topics like awe.
Yeah.
And there's this incredible science of awe and beauty that's really coming into focus that will have new wisdom to share. And then I think that the other thing that I would really, I'm going to challenge our class, which is, the material is only as good as what you do with it. And we're starting to hear from lots of people out there. Em and I are getting emails on a daily basis like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this with my high school, right? I teach in a high school class, high school setting, and I want to use this material there. Or I'm thinking about getting this to people in the criminal justice system, or what have you. That really is the mission of the Greater Good Science Center, is to enable that. And now you have this massive amount of material to do so. So I'd challenge the class, A, to be part of the teaching of this, and then B, to let us know about it, right? Just to tell Em and I what you're doing with this stuff, so we can know how broadly it's being disseminated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. There was actually a live question on this vein, which is, where could I find some literature on science of happiness in the workplace or the corporate environment? And I guess that sort of brings up the question: are we going to do a science of happiness in the workplace course, or a science of happiness for high schoolers course? And that's actually something of an unknown. We're still sort of trying to perfect this one to the extent, the more broad science of happiness. And we're also, I myself am not an expert in workplaces. And so for me to sort of take this and decide, well, I'm going to cater it or tailor it to be a workplace appropriate kind of offering, I would need some collaborators. I would need some people who have that kind of expertise, who would want to build it together. And so that's something that's another reason why we're interested in getting that kind of feedback from students in the course. Like, what are you doing with it, and what are some future opportunities? So to answer the question, though, there are certainly organizations that are interested in how to make workplaces more happy. One of them is the Center for Positive Organizational Scholarship at the University of Michigan. You can sort of Google that and find them and see what kinds of ideas they have about making workplaces happier. Dacher, any other thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that I think Penn's positive psychology program is useful for getting this into workplace settings. Danny Goleman and his work has really spread to organizations in a coherent way. So I would think about those. The Yale Center for Social and Emotional Learning is a good place to. They're more actively engaged in school organizations, so it's growing.
Great. So to be continued, and stay tuned. For those of you who, for whatever reason, might not have had an opportunity or the motivation to visit the Greater Good Science Center website, there are also a lot of resources there for thinking about how to translate or apply some of the principles from the science of happiness into day-to-day life, be they educational settings or workplace settings, family dynamics, relational dynamics. So yeah, there's a lot of information just sort of available for you to pick and choose right at the greatergood.berkeley.edu website if you wanna get started. Okay, moving to another question. This is a really interesting one, and it was posted by one of our discussion board moderators. So in addition to me and Dacher and an outstanding team of assistants and production people at the Greater Good, including Jason Marsh, I have to say thank you to Jason, to Bianca, to Nada, to Chiki, all these really wonderful, important contributors. We have people who volunteer to sort of look through the discussion boards and highlight what's important and respond to questions in interesting and provocative ways. So this person says, I've been curious, and I'm just going to read this, so forgive me for looking away. I've been curious why our negativity bias hasn't lessened over time, since we no longer need to worry about tiger attacks and lots of other sort of spatial predator dangers. Seems like we should have evolved towards seeing more positive as our lives improved, and maybe even more gratitude and mindfulness too. Our focus is no longer on survival, speaking about most people in this class. And then she goes on to say, it's a bit discouraging, truth be told, that we still need to overcome our brain's tendency to see negative stuff much more easily than positive stuff. So thank goodness for neuroplasticity, but how come evolution hasn't helped us out? That's a really interesting question. What do you think, Dacher?
Well, I think we always have to remember kind of the organization of the nervous system in the broader context of evolution, right? So thinking about the negativity bias about being preferentially oriented towards threat and danger and peril and bad stuff is man, that's old, right? That is tens of millions of years of mammalian evolution, right, where we are really worried about predators and rivals. And it, as you would note as well, it activates very old parts of the nervous system. So I mean, in a way, we have to, as in human beings in pursuing happiness, have to work with what evolution gave us, and that is a feature of the brain's design. And I think that the lesson, I'd add two things. One is I don't feel that 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 thesis defines our entire worldview. I think there are going to be realms where positive stuff has greater weight than negative stuff, right? That, for example, we know now, after the negativity bias articles were written, that positive emotions are much more contagious than negative emotions, that smiles and nice pats on the back spread through social networks faster than the negative stuff, which tends to be contained within individuals. So there are going to be places where there's a positivity bias that we're starting to think about. So that's point one. Point two is, as the questioner notes, thank God for neuroplasticity in the frontal lobes and the more recent stuff in evolution that really allow us to do new work with what evolution gave us.
Yeah, yeah. To add to your suggestion that maybe the story isn't done, the
Yeah.
negativity bias story isn't done. One of the presenters at a conference, again, that I was able to the wonderful privilege of being part of in India recently, was an Indian researcher who was studying the dynamics interplay between emotion and cognition. And as you know, this is a topic that I've thought about for years and was really defined my graduate dissertation work. And it was so fun to see this sort of happening somewhere else in the world. And he reported just time and time again was a real advantage for positive emotional information in terms of certain cognitive functioning.
Wow.
So we've got this idea that we're preferentially biased towards consuming or orienting to negative information, but I think it's partly a little bit of the bias of the research sort of choices that have been made. And as this field of, some call positive psychology, we'd like to call the science of happiness, or pro-social psychology, as this continues to evolve, I really believe that we'll begin to break down that idea that the negativity bias is first and foremost. And in fact, it really is context dependent. There are places where very appropriately we should be very quickly attuning to threats and sort of trying to deal with whatever context that is behind that threat. And then there are many more stretches in life where that's not really what's sort of guiding our way of behaving in the world. And in fact, orienting to the positive opportunities, to cooperative opportunities, to moments to affiliate is actually really what's going on. We just haven't done the best job of studying it, testing it, or measuring it. So
nice.
So yeah, that's an answer to that one. Dacher, students wanted to know. what happiness practices do we use? So we gave them one each week, maybe two sometimes. I think during the mindfulness week, we gave a couple. During the self-compassion week, we gave more than one. What do we use? We're people too. What works in our life, our family?
Yeah, no, that I mean, it's so interesting. So, uh, I have you know, the regular yoga practice and the like, and I always tell students when I teach this, I'm not taking half an hour to meditate every day because life is very busy right now. But what I do, and it comes straight out of this science, is uh, I make sure to have a rich language of touch in my life with lots of physical contact with family and friends. I take a few minutes each day to breathe, right? And we know the vagal benefits of breathing. Steve Porges just talked about that at a compassion conference last week. I make sure to, a few times a week to have a few minutes of reflection on gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be in a natural setting or thinking about, like right now, um, my kids are late teenagers, soon to move on, and I make sure we're getting this feeling of like, wow, they're about to, I have a junior in high school, she's about to go. Just to take a moment to appreciate, right, that what we've done. And I make sure, natural settings and trees and
Mm-hmm.
breathing and walking and hiking, and it really, it doesn't add up to a lot. And I make sure to laugh. I think laugh is one of the great
Yeah.
underappreciated virtues of our evolution. You know, I it's probably 3 minutes a day, uh, and it is a game changer.
Fabulous, fabulous. Well, in the 2 minutes that we have left in our hour, which has just zoomed by, I'm always struck at how quickly all of the ideas pass time. I'll offer mine. What I actually echo some of Dacher's, the breathing, the thoughtful, purposeful breathing.
Yeah,
And really kind of any time throughout the day, if I
yeah.
find myself clenching my teeth, okay, my dentist says, you clench your teeth. And I'm like, I'm such a mellow person. What do you mean? But in fact, I do. So at some level, physiologically, I'm expressing some degree of over sympathetic activation. And when I notice that, then for me, that's a prompt. That's a signal. Okay,
Good
you need
point.
to stop, open your mouth, and just breathe, and again, sort of activate that vagal system, bring on the parasympathetic sort of input. The other thing that I find really useful with my younger kids, and I take a lot of advice and perspective from Dacher, who's treading the way with his teenagers, is a practice that is sort of an extension of gratitude, kind of an exaggeration of gratitude. We try to
Mm.
think about, what we're grateful for, but then all the different aspects of the world that have contributed to that benefit or that joy
Wow.
or that, that positivity in our life. So, at the dinner table, there's, oh, this sweet potato. Oh, well, there was the store guy who stacked it up, and then there was the farmer who grew it, and there was the sun and the rain, and there was the Big Bang and the origins of the universe. Like, we really try to connect the moment that we're in with all moments in a way that lets the perspective on the world and flexibility of thinking about oneself just be broader. And for me, that's really helpful. It sort of it makes us less myopic about what's happening right now and what might be worrisome, but rather we're so lucky. We're so
Yeah.
lucky to be part of this incredible, complex enterprise. On that profound note,
Wow.
uh, it's 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, for probably a different hour for many of you elsewhere in the world. I'd like to offer my sincere gratitude, my big thanks to people who joined us this hour. It's really, really wonderful to know that we can connect with people in real time. It's been a challenge for me and Dacher to teach this way, where we don't get to see people and get the feedback, but knowing that it is real sometimes is very valuable. And for those of you who didn't get to join us during the hour, we hope that this is really interesting and helpful and provocative. And again, thank you. Thank you, Dacher, and thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're done. Bye-bye.